Hello, everyone. My name is Leah Wilson, Executive Director for Stand for Health Freedom. We are a nonprofit dedicated to protecting constitutional rights, basic human rights, and parental rights. And it is really our mission to enable you to stand and to stand together collectively to protect your rights to make health decisions based on informed consent and according to your deeply held beliefs of how to care for your physical body, not based on fear, not based on coercion, and not based on government mandates. So we're going to talk about something today. I bet you can guess before I even tell you. Yes, it's COVID-19, but it's a very specific way that COVID-19 is affecting our population right now, and that's how it's affecting mothers, pregnant mothers, and birth and their babies. Right now, if you search COVID-19 on Google, you will see 1 billion hits. So there is mass amounts of information going around right now about the current events. Most of those hits have to do with death rates or oil prices going down or securing funding to help your small business or some places reopening around the country. When are we getting back to business? Some of those hits are there, but the mainstream media, and there's not a lot of coverage on how this is affecting that very vulnerable population of mothers right now. And it's not only about how policies that hospitals implement because of CDC guidance that comes down through the state and then is across the board implemented in certain states or areas. It's not just how those policies affect mothers' rights, but how it affects their health, how it affects maternal health outcomes, and how it affects birth outcomes and for those babies. So this issue was first brought to our awareness that there was some concern in the grassroots movement by Danielle Lasher from Informed Choice Maryland, and she runs a birthing group that deals with a lot of these types of issues, and mothers started coming to her. And so we collaborated and partnered and put together a campaign that allows you to send an email to your governor and to the president to ask them to support evidence-based policies and guidelines during this time for our moms and babies. And we also, so Danielle is going to join me today, and then we also wanted to invite Dr. Christiane Northrup to join this conversation with us, as she has been a woman that has pioneered women's health issues for decades, and we just cannot thank her enough for the guidance that she has provided, not only during this time, but through the years on women's health. So thank you both so much for joining me today, and this will be a great conversation. So I'd like to start off with talking to Danielle. You're welcome. Thank you. I'd like to start off the conversation with Danielle. I'll tell you a little bit about her first. She's a childbirth educator and a freelance writer for publications including Baxter, Baby Gaga, The Organic Daily Post, and moms.com. And she also built an international parenting platform called Bump Mama and the Natural Birth Support Group, Natural Parenting 101, and in 2019 launched Informed Choice Maryland, a 501c4 nonprofit advocating for the right to informed medical consent and individual autonomy, also with healthcare decisions. So Danielle, we connected a few weeks back over this issue, and you were hearing stories pop up all over the country as you were helping moms through this. So tell us a few minutes what's happening and what you're hearing from pregnant women today.
Sure. Yeah, so this really, it fell on my radar first in the Natural Birth Support Group that I run, and I started seeing these women coming in, not just longtime members, but a lot of new women. There's thousands of new women who suddenly are springing up interested in natural birth, and I quickly realized these women are not, they weren't just jumping from like, oh, I want to try a natural hospital birth. They were jumping from a place of, I was planning on having a medicated birth in the next few weeks, and now all of a sudden I want to birth at home. They're afraid of not COVID-19, they're afraid of going to the hospital. They're afraid of the policies that are set in place there. And around the same time, we had a delegate, a really great guy, Dan Cox, who represents Frederick County here in Maryland. And he had kind of championed this on his own, spearheaded it rather, to write a letter to his governor, our governor here in Maryland, Larry Hogan, and President Trump, outlining the current guidelines the CDC is dispatching to hospitals and pointing out that they're not evidence-based. And the World Health Organization actually has a different set of guidelines right now. And I know we don't always support what the World Health Organization has to say. In this instance, it just happens that we agree because the World Health Organization is taking this stance saying, hey, none of these practices the CDC is insisting upon are evidence-based. They're not only protecting anybody, they're probably causing harm. So we took what Delegate Cox did and ran with it, and that's how we thought this would be great to pair up with you guys to kind of make it national, because it certainly isn't limited to Maryland. But yeah, we're seeing a lot of mothers are kind of terrified. I mean, that's an appropriate word. Their anxiety is worse than I ever see it, and I see it often because a lot of the women that come into my group are not just first-time moms who want to try to natural birth. They are women who've had a bad experience in a hospital already, and they want to make sure that doesn't happen again. So here they are trucking along for months thinking, you know, they're in a good place, they're prepared, and all of this happens. And now they're being told, you know, you have to consent to mandatory testing. Some of them are being coerced into inducing and having C-sections based on this idea that we have to keep the hospitals empty, even though their hospitals are fairly empty. They are, you know, being told that they can't bring their doulas, some of them that they can't even bring their husband or their partner. So it's certainly a lot for anyone to digest, but I don't think I would digest that well if I was 37 weeks pregnant. To have that thrown at you would be a lot for anyone, no matter how well educated or prepared you are.
Yes, and so what are you hearing most from the moms? What are the guidelines that are causing them the anxiety? Is it the birthing alone? Is it the separation from their newborn?
It is mostly the separation from their newborn. I would say some of them that have had a traumatic birth in the past, especially those who were planning on a doula attending, they suddenly feel like the rug's been ripped out from under them. They've lost kind of their security blanket. And, but that still makes up, you know, only a portion of what most of these women are facing. And I think it's going to be such a systemic issue because we're not only is it creating this anxiety, and we could go down a whole rabbit hole about what maternal anxiety might do to a developing baby, but we have to think about the long-term outcomes, not just will they get through the birth okay, but how does that mother process that birth? How does a husband or a father or partner process not being able to be there for it? What if mom is positive and they quarantine and separate them for 2 weeks? What are you looking at in terms of breastfeeding outcomes? Or missing skin to skin is a big problem. Skin to skin, I think it gets a bad rap sometimes. It's kind of become this thing that people think is some kind of thing crunchy moms do or something, when really it's just very evidence-based, and it should be a practice for all births. So when you take that out, you're looking at reduced APGAR scores, you're looking at, you know, the baby is losing that potential to regulate their temperature and their respiration rate, and all these tiny little things that maybe we've come to take for granted, but we just don't have the evidence here to negate all of those benefits of birth afterward. And that's what I think most of them are afraid of, is losing not just the emotional impact of not being able to have their baby right after birth, but losing the opportunity to do all the things they plan to do to set their child up for this healthy, you know, positive life from the start.
Yes, and one of the reasons we at SHF are so passionate about parental rights and the preservation of those rights is because parents are truly the single most important indicator of success in a child before the age of 18. You know, and that starts at birth, and it starts with that relationship with the mother and that mom being empowered to follow her intuition, to nurture and care for that child from even day one. And like you mentioned, Skin to skin is not just a good idea or something that's, a little bit sweet, but it helps the child's respiratory rate regulate. Is that what I hear you saying? Respiratory rate?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And it stabilizes their temperature, so we're probably going to see far more children be placed in warmers. But it's just very clear, and no one is looking at the evidence, and that is what we need this campaign for.
Yes. So we've put the campaign up on www.standforhealthfreedom.com. So if you go to our website, you can see there that you can email your governor and President Trump to let them know that we're asking the evidence-based guidelines be referred to and used across hospital systems in their states instead of the CDC guidelines. So yes. Thank you. And we've had a little over 1,300 letters sent so far, and it's still an issue, and people still have an opportunity to stand together.
They do, and I think that also they can submit videos, right?
Yes, you can also film a video, especially that can be super impactful if you are a pregnant woman or if you have a personal story attached to this, for the human to be behind the request that's going to a person in position of influence. So the videos are a very powerful tool through the portal.
I always like to remind people, because I think, especially now, we see every day, right? There's some petition for something where you can click and sign your name. And I think these kind of issues can almost get watered down by that, where people think like it's just another thing somebody created that's going to go nowhere. But I want them to understand that there is a difference when you have an actual nonprofit organization doing this, and it's directed, targeted right at legislators, and they are obligated to address your issues. I think it's important that people understand that, and we try to really educate with Informed Choice Maryland, and make our members realize that your voice really does matter. It might seem like it doesn't right now, and we are probably going to have a lot of mistakes made and things to work out from this whole situation on many, many government levels when we come out of it. I know that there is a lot of abuse of authority, abuse of power happening right now, but people shouldn't lose faith in that aspect, that their voice counts, and that with those larger numbers that they will pay attention, and you can affect change. And I know because I do it, and I've seen us do it, and I've seen just in our state and many other states this past year, we see a lot of the headlines, and a lot of the states, maybe like Maine, the referendum didn't work out like everybody wanted to. A lot of attention gets placed on that, and I try to balance it with people and say, hey, you know what, in Maryland, we managed to get all of our bills withdrawn this session that we targeted. So it's like we're not losing everywhere. We are gaining steam. It's not like Maine gave up. There are steps you take. There are things that are still in the works, and they can be effective, but you have to, you have to put your money where your mouth is, right? You have to use your voice, and every one of them counts. Don't assume that somebody else will make up for you not opting in. If this matters to you, please submit your testimony.
Yes, that's so good. I appreciate that, encouraging people in that way, especially because when you're with an organization, you not only stand and make your voice heard, however, we stand stronger together. And when you're representing 70,000 advocates, then the political weight is a little bit different. People start to pay attention, which is extremely important. So thank you. And Dr. Christiane Northrup, I'm sure many watching already are familiar with your work. You've been a legend for decades and a visionary and pioneer for women's health and wellness. I'll tell you a little bit more about her for those of you who do not yet know that she's an authority on, I love how your Instagram says this, authority on everything that can go right with the female body. I love that. Perfect bio. And her work has been featured on the Oprah Winfrey Show, Today Show, 2020. She was also named in the Reader's Digest as one of the 100 most trusted people in America. Isn't that awesome? In 2016, she was named one of Oprah Winfrey's Super Soul 100, which is a group of leaders using their voices and talent to awaken humanity. So, New York Times bestselling author, Dr. Christiane Northrup, it's a pleasure to have you today as a part of this conversation. And I wanted you to be able to speak as a practicing OBGYN for many years, what your thoughts are when you hear about hospitals instituting policies such as these.
First of all, let me just say that a lot of my career was spent trying to get what you're talking about implemented in the first place. So I remember as a resident, the first time I ever put the baby from the birth canal onto the mother, skin to skin, and left the umbilical cord pulsating, which it's supposed to, by the way. That's how nature set it up. That as the baby's heart and lungs are making the most profound changes of that child's life, it has an umbilical cord, it has a safety valve so that it becomes oxygenated and nutriented from the mother while those things are going on. And then you can do delayed cord clamping. It took years to institute this. When I first put a baby on the mother's abdomen, my mentor said, her glove touched yours, you're no longer sterile. And I said, Dr. Jones, I'll say, I just took this baby out of the vagina. In order to sterilize it, we'd have to boil it. And he couldn't refute it. So my whole career has been looking at the science of bonding. John Kennel and Marshall Klaus wrote a book, a very seminal book, back in the late 70s, early 80s. John Kennel formed the very first neonatal intensive care unit in Cleveland at the Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital. And what they found was that they, in the first babies that they brought back, the first preemies and so on, that they had put in isolettes and they had tried everything to save their lives, they were finding that far too many of them came back battered later. And this is all in the book, it's all documented. And they couldn't figure it out until they started to study. This guy named Cooney had isolettes, and they actually showed premature babies at the Chicago World's Fair. And later, when they tried to give the babies back to the mother, he showed that you could keep the babies alive. The mothers didn't want them. This led them to the study of bonding. And finally, we realized there's a sensitive period after the baby's born. It needs to be with the mother. The mother's body is an external placenta. It's exactly what you said, Danny. The mother's body regulates the breathing, the heart rate, the so on. Not only that, it seeds the baby's skin with the mother's microbiome so that she's protected from the germs in the hospital. So the baby's protected by getting seeded with what the mother's bacteria, viruses, and so on that make up the microbiome. That happens. So at this point in time, I was a resident when fetal monitoring came in for the first time, and I watched the C-section rate soar to 25% because no one knew how to read the monitor. At this time in history, this is hard for anyone to believe. We still do not have any studies that show that fetal monitoring does anything other than increase the C-section rate. Because what it does is it takes the mother away from her experience. You walk into a room, right? You say, how are you doing? Everyone looks at the monitor. Wait a minute. Why don't you go inside to see what's going on? And many, many times what the monitor shows is that the baby is afraid. So you just move the mother, you comfort her, and the heart rate goes back to normal. Now, John Kennel did 6 studies in Guatemala and other places where he showed that a woman standing by, a doula, that's even if a woman was across the room, just being supportive, it decreased the labor time in half, and it also decreased the C-section rate, and it decreased the rate of anesthesia, because we know that if a woman gets an epidural, it very often causes an idiopathic fever. No one knows where that comes from. And then the baby has to go through a sepsis workup and be separated from the mother. And he pointed out that if we used doulas, it would save the healthcare system, and this was 20 years ago, it would save the healthcare system $3 billion in costs that didn't need to be there. for C-sections, for sepsis workups, for all the stuff that happens when the mother in that delicate stage, when she really needs to have her confidence shored up as a new mother, like breastfeeding support, all of that stuff, that's when she needs the most support. So separating a newborn and putting them in the newborn nursery, which a friend of mine way back in the day used to call the newborn nursery a concentration camp for babies. I mean, they need to be held. They need to be cuddled. The mother's body is what is needed, and the father's body. Now, we could go into the vagaries of COVID testing. I mean, there was a New York Times article just, I think, today that pointed out that the tests are flawed, they're not accurate. So you're doing these draconian things based on very flimsy evidence. We also know, depending on whether you even trust the test, that 80% of those who test positive are completely asymptomatic and would never get sick anyway. So we need to look at ways to shore up the immunity of mother and baby. That's things like vitamin C, zinc. Most of these people, remember, the vast majority of people who get sick are over 70 and they have comorbidities, high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity. And it looks like the virus targets Asian males and Black males. So we have this group of women having babies who are being unfairly treated for some idea that this is a deadly virus. In my opinion, I'm with you. It is far more deadly to their long-term outcome to separate the mother and baby, because we have very good studies that when you separate a mother and her baby, the bonding doesn't happen the way it's supposed to. And then there's much more morbidity later on. The mother has anxiety, maybe depression. She doesn't trust herself. The baby doesn't sleep through the night, all of that stuff. Now, I am not saying that you cannot bond with your baby if you miss that sensitive period, because humans, we know mothers who adopt babies bond beautifully. We have that ability as humans to do it. But why do that if you have another choice? And also these planned cesareans, what's that about? I mean, is the vagina going to give the kid COVID? This makes no sense. And you know what it is to me? It's going backward in time. We've actually made so much progress. When my daughter had to have an emergency C-section for an undiagnosed breech for a home delivery, I went into the hospital where I hadn't been for a long time, and I saw all these wonderful Skintoskin posters on the walls, and I ran into one of my buddies from the hospital 20 years before, and she said, from the time you left here, it took me 20 years to get the skin-to-skin policy as part of the hospital system. Oh my God. And now we have a virus that's not only killing the economy, increasing the suicide rate, having them close beaches and parks where sun and fresh air kill viruses. This is insanity. It's almost like when people get sovereignty, it's no joke that this is a coronavirus. That's sovereignty. We must have sovereignty over our own intuition, over our own bodies. We must declare, I do not consent. I do not consent. We need to know what's going on, why it's going on. If you're really sensitive, you don't have to go there too much. It depends on your temperament. But you need to know that there are forces that are trying to take away this sovereignty that is the basis of your immunity. It's the basis of your health. Immunity is wired in by someone's sense of safety and security in the world. That wires in bone health and immune health. So when you begin life with this fear of contagion, it makes the system a little wonky. And so I understand, Danny, totally why women would be more afraid of the hospital at this point, because what we really need is a system where you get all the benefits of the hospital if you need it. And then you need the self-trust of your own birthing experience. And we have the data that shows that support people make a huge difference in outcome. Those studies have all been done, and that babies separated from their mothers don't do as well. And these policies are insane. They are insane.
They're not just bad ideas. They're actually detrimental and insane, because when you look at birth outcomes and where America currently stands
Oh,
in
please.
relation to comparable nations, we don't have time to mess around with birth outcomes. We have to be doing things that support positive birth outcomes. Is that not
Yeah,
right?
we have what I think are maternal mortality, which is what is used, that indicator is used as an indicator of the health of your entire country. And our
Wow.
maternal mortality has doubled in the last 20 years. Maternal mortality in the richest nation in the world. And it is because of these kinds of practices. And also, let me bring this up. Why would we be injecting 99% of the newborns in this country with a Hep B vaccine that contains something like 15 times the FDA recommended dose of aluminum, which is a neurotoxin, when the only way to get Hep B is by having sex with prostitutes or using dirty needles from a drug addict? This is insane. And so, we people need to understand this. And perhaps the outcome of this, when it's all said and done, will be a shoring up of our individual sovereignty, because that is what is needed. Medicine has much to offer, but when it's based on fear, isolation, these are very old medical concepts. They need to be updated by understanding the microbiome, by understanding the effect of nutrients, by understanding the effect of touch and community and emotional support. Hospitals were built as fortresses against germs. I have a sister who died in a pool of her own vomit that my mother could not hold her. They didn't know why she wouldn't eat, and she died in the hospital at 6 months old. And my mother could only look through a little window. We've come very far. Why are we now using this as an excuse to go backward?
That's a really good point, that we don't need to go backward. There are other solutions. And a lot of public health policy today is being centered around what is good for the system or the industry, or what props up the system as a whole. But lest we forget that a public society is made up of healthy individuals. Like, we will never have, if we have poor health outcomes, if we have policies that produce individual poor health outcomes, we will never have a healthy society as a whole.
Or when we tell society that all you healthy, able-bodied people need to sequester yourself to save the immunocompromised, that is the wrong conversation. That's the wrong conversation. So everyone has drunk that Kool-Aid. Oh my God, I've got to get 80 shots so that I can protect Sammy down the road. There isn't even any science to show that. So it is time that this is a time of waking up. I call it the Great Awakening. And to see my field of OBGYN, that I worked so hard to change these policies, and Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom, when it first came out in '94, was groundbreaking with all the data on, why this was important, and doulas and all the rest of it. And it was 20 years ahead of its time. And now here we are going backward. Now, we're not going to go backward. I don't believe we're going to go backward. I know we're not going to go backward. Why? Because we have you adorable young women who have taken up the torch, so I can rest. But, but anyway, there's a lot of you that are not going to let this happen. Period. End of story.
So what advice would you give, Dr. Northrup, for young women today who are pregnant and due to have a baby? What would you tell her to do to protect herself and to take comfort in this season?
Okay, I would make certain that she has a really good nutrition. Have her vitamin D level checked. It should be 40 to 80 nanograms per milliliter, and that absolutely kills viruses. Make sure she's getting enough zinc. You can do that through some seafood, or you can do it through just ordering some liquid zinc. I like the Vimergy brand. I'm not associated with that company. It just tastes good. and then vitamin C. Now, with vitamin C, if you're using vitamin C, and the usual dose would be 2,000 to 5,000 milligrams per day, and you can use the liposomal vitamin C. You want to be sure that you continue then to breastfeed, because you don't want the baby born with really high vitamin C levels and then have them plummet. So you need to breastfeed and have those levels continue into the baby. I would also talk with your midwife, with the hospital staff, because what I've heard, and you can update me on this, is that when the New York City hospitals started to institute this business of you couldn't have your support person in there, it was overturned because there was a huge petition of 800,000 people signed it, and the hospitals in New York, according to my sources, reversed that policy. Can you tell me where that stands?
Danny, do you know exactly where that stands?
They did, as far as I'm aware. Yeah, it's really sporadic. It's interesting, and at the same time, it's not if you follow the CDC, because half the time the things that we see happening in the hospital are, off the cuff. But it seems like everyone is not on board with it. We see a sprinkling of it in the Midwest. It does, in my personal opinion, from just what I've seen, it does seem like it's happening, or I'm seeing personally more reports of it in states that are more what would be stereotyped as liberal, which is
that is exactly right. That's where the vaccine mandates are happening, is the D states. And makes no sense to me. I used to be an abortion provider. I mean, how can we have informed consent and choice over here and no choice over here? But let me go, I want to go on record now. Let me just go on record here. It is relatively easy to have a soul leave your body. I've had patients, including my own sister, who got pregnant and had a fourth boy and said, I can't do this, I'm going to put my head in an oven. And I said, talk to the soul of that baby and tell the soul, this is not the time. And my sister did this, and my friend Gladys McGarry, who's like 96, used to do this in her practice. She did home deliveries, MD. And many people just say to the baby, I'm sorry, this is not the time. And then the mother will simply miscarry. So let me go on record as saying, if I had to choose between informed consent with vaccines, and with now the CDC schedule of 70 mandated vaccines by the age of 18, that or reproductive choice, I'm going with no vaccine mandates every time, because it's easier to have a soul leave your body and to somehow get the baby to go, or to have the baby, than it is to get rid of the toxicity of 80, 70, whatever vaccines with all of the toxins that are in them. So having been staunchly pro-choice, marching that way, I have switched my tune, and this is much more important in my view.
Yes, and having the ability to pursue health in the way that you choose, because there's not one right way. There's not a single right way to pursue health. And that's what Stand for Health Freedom really is here to protect, is that there's not a single route to health, and that we have to protect our ability to care for our bodies in the way that we see fit as individuals and as parents for our children. So this conversation,
one thing.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
No, one thing that I don't think we've touched upon is also what I'm seeing in the group is not just a flood of people wanting to home birth. And some of them do, but they don't have the money, or they don't have access to a midwife. A lot of the birth workers and midwives in my group right now are at capacity.
I'll bet.
And they couldn't possibly take on someone else before fall. And so we're seeing a lot of women who, before this, were planning a hospital birth, are suddenly trying to kind of crash course into unassisted birth.
Wow.
Wow. I am supportive of a mother's choice to birth the way she wants to. I would never birth unassisted, but it's not out of a fear. It's actually that I really love the midwife-patient relationship.
I know, it's beautiful.
The same evidence you're talking about, and the comparison between having a woman with you during labor and the effects they have, and how those effects are not there if a man is with you in labor.
It's true.
it's just substantial to me, and it's very maternal, and I like that almost like exchange of ancestral wisdom
Yes.
and support from that kind of figure with me. But that doesn't mean I don't, if a woman wants to birth unassisted, by all means, that's her choice. But I worry about that choice now being made out of fear instead of empowerment and education. I worry what kind of outcomes we might see from all of these women jumping into it and trying to learn it so quickly that it may, end up tarnishing the whole home birth movement if we see
Yes.
negative outcomes of that.
Yes.
From all of this.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with you on that. I mean, we had a whole smorgasbord of choice here for a long time in the turn of this century, and now
Right.
suddenly it's being taken away. But that is in all areas right now, because we are in this great awakening where we're all being asked, take a look, wake up, don't believe everything you see on the mainstream media. I mean, we've had studies going back a long time ago that showed that in low-risk women, home birth is sometimes safer than hospital birth in low-risk women. But it is also true, and everyone who's ever been around birth knows, that 1 in 10 births will have something untoward go wrong. And so you want to have, birth is one of those things that's a crisis. In fact, I liken this whole COVID thing to birth. That, we're right at, we're not quite fully dilated and ready to push. So we're at that transition where everyone's saying, I'm not doing this anymore. This feels terrible. I'm done. But there's no way out.
I have so many friends and colleagues right now who were, actively trying to conceive, and everything has been halted. And that really speaks to me because they're not the 37-week pregnant woman. They're not even pregnant yet. And they're afraid, I better not jump into this yet, because what if we're not normal 9 months from now?
See that?
That is serious fear.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So we have to have trust in the new vision that's being born. And it's being born. It is being born. When you get 2 million people meditating 444 on 4/4/2020, we know that the Schumann resonance of the planet changed as a result of our collective cardiac coherence and the electromagnetic field around each of us. I think it's important to remember that darkness, that's just my term for service to self people, narcissists, energy vampires, extraterrestrial lizards, whatever you want to call them, they feed on fear. So if we understand that when we stand for sovereignty, but also kindness, and also, just working with our doctors, with our nurses, generally speaking, light workers are everywhere. They're in the hospital, they're everywhere. And you can just send out a beam all around you of divine love and just ask to be divinely guided to the right people. But do not walk in fear. I mean, what you're saying, oh my God, we better not conceive because you never know. That's putting your life on hold, because each of us is part of the awakening. What you said earlier about each of us being involved with petitions politically, whatever. Let me tell you what happened in Maine as a result of our citizens referendum. We have a group now that is so loving and so tightly knit and so supportive of each other. And Louise Habakis in New Jersey said the same thing. This is a group of loving people. She said just the hugs and the whole thing. So this is what's birthing the new. And never forget, we as individuals have enormous power to change the system. Back when I was in the 80s doing, all this stuff that was considered, leading edge and cuckoo and all the rest of it. I just knew it was the right thing to do. I never intended to write a book. I never intended to be on Oprah. I just had a thing that I was seeing that I thought needed to be known by people. And one step led to another step and so on. So I think that's how we have to do what is in front of us, what our hearts tell us to do, understand our power, and but also healthy boundaries. If you've ever been around a narcissist or a psychopath, healthy boundary. I'm sorry, I will not consent. And remember now, in this day of social media and the trolling and all of that, holy mother. So I just ban the people. I'm done. I just ban them. You can't, there are people who you cannot talk to. They are going to fight till the end. Don't waste your time. Don't feel bad about it. You know, I'm under attack in our state, you know, for being on the cover of Maine Women's Magazine at this time because I'm so dangerous, you know, an anti-vaxxer and oh my God. How about reading my testimony before the legislature? I'm for informed consent and individualized medical care. Doesn't that seem reasonable? So we're in a time where you cannot let yourself be stopped by name calling, because that's what stopped women dead in their tracks forever, right? So no more, you know, you're not going to be stopped.
Taking this circling all the way back around, because we could talk about these theories and public policies for days together.
Yeah, we could.
But taking it full circle back around is the policies of control as we look at a very vulnerable population of pregnant women as they birth. You know, Dr. Christiane, you made it known that this is a point in time that these women should be shored up with confidence, to be launched
Yes.
into motherhood, to pursue motherhood with passion and to make intentional decisions, which is our desire for every parent, is to be able to be empowered to make intentional decisions and make their voice heard. So
Yeah.
as we wrap up, I
is.
want to give Danielle Lasher an opportunity to tell you how to follow Informed Choice Maryland and her various birthing groups. Where's the best way to find you and follow you?
Sure. So Informed Choice, you can check us out at informedchoicemaryland.com. And we are also on Facebook. We have a page and a group you can search for. And I think we actually come up in the list.
Right.
I do. And my birth group is facebook.com/group/natural birth support, or you can just search natural birth support group. The picture is me right now, so it should be recognizable. We have a sister group that's Natural Parenting 101, and that's a good place to go if maybe you're planning to birth but not unmedicated, or you want to just continue following evidence-based practicing parenting practices after birth.
We so appreciate everything you do for the birthing community and for the parenting community. And so thank you so much for joining us today. And
Thank
Dr.
you.
Christiane Northrup, tell us how to best follow your work and stay tuned with what you're talking about these days.
Right. I'd go to my website, Dr. Northrup, NORTHRUP.com. And also I'm Dr. Christiane Northrup on Facebook and Instagram. And I've got a Twitter thing too. Twitter is where I do more of my, you know, really sort of deep state stuff.
That's good to know. Stand for Health Freedom is a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting basic human rights, constitutional rights, and parental rights. And our Digital Advocacy Center was launched just last August 2019 to let you take a stand on issues that matter so that you can have direct access to elected officials and others in positions of influence. And the platform provides that zero barrier automated access with a few clicks of a button, and you can personalize the message that's already there for you. And it will either be through email or phone or Twitter or fax or video. And it's well-vetted research and information that allows you to send a quality message to your elected officials. Our birthing campaign is one of several campaigns that we currently have on the platform. And since we are a 501c4 nonprofit, we rely on the generosity of our advocates to help keep our operations moving forward. I know this is a difficult time for many, and we are stretched more than ever, but it's also more important than ever to give, because in times of emergency, health freedom does not stop being important. It becomes more important. So without health freedom, we have no real freedom. So if you can, go to our website, www.standforhealthfreedom.com, and click the tab that says support our efforts. Even if it's only $5 or $10 or $15 a month, that makes a huge difference with our ability to continue to serve you and to make your voice heard. And then collectively, we stand together even stronger. So thanks again to Dr. Christiane Northrup and to Danielle Lasher, and thank you for joining us. Have a great one.